Federal Judge Amara Washington stands frozen before a courthouse mirror, her once proud crown of natural hair reduced to uneven patches. Her scalp bears the marks of deliberate humiliation. In her hand, she clutches a judicial gavel torn between fury and the oath she swore to uphold the law, even for the officer who just destroyed not only her hair, but everything he thought she was. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice and resilience, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against discrimination, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose the truth about racial injustice in America. Now let's rewind to see how Judge Washington's appointment set the stage for an unthinkable confrontation. Amara Washington had spent 20 years building an impeccable legal career that led to this moment. At 42, her appointment as a federal judge in Oak Ridge County, Georgia marked a historic milestone, yet the local news insisted on describing it as controversial, despite her sterling credentials from Harvard Law and her distinguished record as a prosecutor and civil rights attorney. The morning of her departure for Oak Ridge, Amara stood before her bathroom mirror in her Washington, D.C. apartment, contemplating her appearance. Her fingers traced through her natural hair, which she typically straightened for professional settings. "Not this time," she whispered to herself, deciding that her first day would be authentic in every way. Her longtime friend and fellow attorney Janelle had warned her about Oak Ridge County's reputation during their farewell dinner. "That place is stuck in 1965, Janelle had said between sips of wine. "The old guard runs everything. The courthouse, the sheriff's department, even the local businesses. They close ranks against outsiders, especially black women with authority." Amara had simply smiled. "Good thing I didn't get where I am by asking for permission to take up space." The 5-hour drive to Oak Ridge was uneventful until she crossed the county line, where she noticed the immediate increase in police presence. 3 separate patrol cars passed her within 10 minutes, each officer turning to watch her Tesla with obvious interest. She checked her speed display, exactly 7 miles below the limit. The Garden Inn, where she'd booked a suite until her housing was finalized, seemed pleasant enough from the outside. The staff was polite, if not particularly warm, and she noticed a few double takes at her credentials. After settling in, Amara ventured down to the hotel restaurant for dinner. She chose a corner table where she could observe the room while reviewing case files for her first day. A table of uniformed police officers sat across the dining room, their boisterous laughter occasionally breaking her concentration. When the waitress brought her check, Amara overheard snippets of their conversation. "Can you believe they're bringing in some affirmative action judge from D.C.?" a stocky officer with a crew cut said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Heard she's got no experience with real crime, just those bleeding heart cases." Another officer, taller with a receding hairline, snorted. "Won't last 6 months. Holloway will make sure of that." Amara maintained her composure, neither turning nor acknowledging their words. Instead, she committed their faces to memory, noting the names on their uniforms, Whitaker and Mercer. There would be time for introductions in her courtroom where their attitudes would face the full weight of federal authority. Later that evening, as she organized her files, Amara researched Police Chief Richard Holloway. His grandfather had been sheriff during the civil rights era, and his father had followed in those footsteps. Richard had maintained the family tradition, rising through the ranks to become chief 15 years ago. Local news archives painted him as a community pillar, but deeper digging revealed a department with an unusually high number of settled brutality cases, most sealed by judicial order. More telling were the cases that disappeared entirely, misconduct complaints that never made it past initial filing. The pattern was clear. Chief Holloway protected his officers at all costs. A message from her judicial assistant popped up on her phone. "Chief Holloway called to welcome you to Oak Ridge. Asked if you needed a police escort to the courthouse tomorrow. I declined on your behalf, as discussed." Amara smiled grimly. So Holloway was already establishing surveillance, framing it as courtesy. She texted back, "Good, I'll drive myself. Have security ready at 9:45. She closed her laptop and walked to the window looking out at the moonlit courthouse dome visible in the distance. Tomorrow she would take that bench and begin the real work of justice in a place that had forgotten what the word meant. What she couldn't know was that Richard Holloway was in his office at that very moment reviewing a file compiled on Judge Amara Washington. Her academic records, case histories, even personal details about her divorce 5 years prior, and her advocacy for police reform lay spread across his desk. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Judge Hargrove Holloway here. About that new appointment. We might have a problem." The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge as Amara prepared for her first day. She chose a tailored charcoal suit that complemented her natural hair, which she'd moisturized and shaped to perfection. Her father's pocket watch, the one he'd given her when she passed the bar examination, was carefully tucked into her briefcase alongside her judicial credentials. The ceremonial robes were already waiting in her chambers. Amara felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and determination as she navigated her Tesla through the historic district toward the courthouse. She had timed the drive perfectly, allowing 30 minutes for the 15-minute journey, accounting for any unexpected delays. What she hadn't accounted for was the patrol car that pulled out behind her 3 blocks from her hotel, following at a consistent distance. Amara checked her speed display, 43 in a 45 zone. The cruiser's lights flashed just as she approached Magnolia Avenue, the main thoroughfare leading to the courthouse. With a controlled sigh, she signaled and pulled to the curb, positioning her car in clear view of a cafe with morning patrons watching through large windows. Perfect witnesses. She kept both hands visible on the steering wheel as the officer approached, recognizing him immediately as one from the hotel restaurant, Officer Whitaker, the one with the crew cut who had mocked her appointment. "License and registration," he demanded, without preamble, his tone clipped and lacking the customary "ma'am" that Southern officers typically employed. "May I ask why I've been stopped, Officer Whitaker?" Amara replied calmly, noting how his eyes narrowed at her use of his name. "You were doing 52 in a 35. Yes," he stated, though they both knew the speed limit was 45, and her display showed she'd been under it. "I'm actually Federal Judge Amara Washington, and I'm due at the courthouse this morning," she said, reaching slowly toward her purse. "My judicial credentials are in my bag." Officer Whitaker's hand moved to his holster. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked. "Anyone can claim to be a judge. Show me your license first." Amara complied, maintaining eye contact as she carefully retrieved her driver's license. "My judicial credentials and robe are in my trunk. If you'll allow me to show you—" "Step out of the vehicle." Whitaker interrupted, his voice hardening. "Sir, that's not necessary. I'm simply trying to—" "Step out of the vehicle now," he repeated this time, opening her door. "This is not a request." Recognizing the dangerous escalation, Amara slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. "I'm complying, but I want to note that this stop appears pretextual and potentially discriminatory." As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she noticed a second patrol car arriving. Officer Mercer, the tall officer from the restaurant, emerged with a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. A quick glance at his record would show 7 excessive force complaints, all involving black suspects, all dismissed. "Hands against the car legs spread," Whitaker instructed. "This is unnecessary," Amara stated firmly. "I have not committed any traffic violation, and I've identified myself as a federal judge en route to the courthouse." "And I'm the Queen of England," Mercer laughed, coming to stand beside his colleague. "Until we verify your identity, you're just another person claiming to be someone important." When Amara didn't immediately comply, Whitaker roughly spun her around, slamming her against the vehicle with enough force to knock her watch from her wrist. The antique timepiece clattered to the pavement, its crystal shattering on impact. "That was my father's watch, sir," Amara said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "You've just damaged federal property and assaulted a federal judge." "Stop resisting." Whitaker responded loud enough for the gathering onlookers to hear, though Amara was standing perfectly still. She felt the cold metal of handcuffs close around her wrists, calibrated unnecessarily tight. From the corner of her eye, she noticed several bystanders had begun recording the incident on their phones. Good. The digital record would be irrefutable. Officer Whitaker, badge number 873, and Officer Mercer, badge number 914, you are currently violating Title 18 U.S. Code Section 242 by willfully depriving me of rights under color of law. Amara recited clearly, knowing the legal significance of her words and that they were being recorded. This will constitute a felony once my identity is confirmed. Rather than giving them pause, her knowledge of the law seemed to irritate the officers further. "I think I smell something suspicious," Whitaker announced loudly. "Possible contraband. We'll need to search the vehicle." "I do not consent to any search," Amara stated firmly. "You lack probable cause or reasonable suspicion of any crime." "Refusing a search sounds like you've got something to hide," Mercer taunted, already opening her passenger door. "This is becoming a federal case with each passing second," Amara warned, maintaining her composure despite the growing humiliation of being handcuffed in public view. "I suggest you contact Chief Holloway immediately." At the mention of their chief, the officers exchanged a glance that confirmed Amara's suspicion this was no random stop. She was being deliberately targeted. "Get in the car," Whitaker ordered, guiding her roughly toward the patrol vehicle. "We'll sort this out at the station." As they drove away, Amara watched her Tesla containing her judicial robe credentials and case files recede in the distance. The courthouse loomed ahead just 3 blocks away, where in 45 minutes she was scheduled to be sworn in and begin her first session. At the police station, Amara was led through a side entrance avoiding the main booking area. The desk sergeant looked up with mild surprise as they brought in a professionally dressed woman in handcuffs. "Claims she's the new federal judge," Whitaker explained with exaggerated skepticism. "No ID, no proof, possibly impersonating a federal official." This was blatantly false. She had shown her driver's license, but Amara recognized the narrative being constructed. "I've identified myself and provided my driver's license," she corrected calmly. "My judicial credentials are in my vehicle, which your officers have illegally seized. I demand my phone call immediately." The sergeant studied her for a moment before responding. "Judges don't get special treatment here, ma'am. We'll process you like anyone else, then we'll see about making calls." The fluorescent lights of the processing room cast harsh shadows across the cinder block walls as Amara was led to a metal bench bolted to the floor. The room smelled of industrial disinfectant and sweat, a sensory reminder of power dynamics at play. Officer Whitaker had disappeared, presumably to report to Chief Holloway, while Officer Mercer stood guard with his arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk permanently etched on his face. 15 minutes later, the door swung open to reveal Chief Richard Holloway. Himself, his imposing frame filling the doorway as he assessed Amara with calculated interest. He was older than his photo suggested, with silver threading through his dark hair and deep lines etched around cold blue eyes. Well, he drawled, circling Amara like a predator. Someone causing trouble on their first day in town. His tone was almost pleasant, which made the menace underlying his words more pronounced. "Chief Holloway," Amara acknowledged, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm Federal Judge Amara Washington. Your officers illegally detained me while I was en route to the courthouse for my first session. I've been denied my phone call, my credentials have been ignored, and I'm currently missing my swearing-in ceremony. This department is accumulating federal violations by the minute." Holloway's smile never reached his eyes. "That's quite a story. Unfortunately, we have no way to verify who you are. Your purse contained a driver's license that could be fake, and you have no judicial credentials on your person." "My credentials are in my briefcase, which was in my car when your officers brought me here," Amara responded evenly. "A simple call to the federal courthouse would confirm my identity." Holloway checked his watch with exaggerated deliberation. Processing takes time. We do things properly here in Oak Ridge. He turned to a female officer who had entered the room. Officer Miller, please process our guest completely before we make any calls. Standard procedure. Officer Sandra Miller was a compact woman with a severe blonde bob and cold efficiency in her movements. Yes, Chief, she replied, retrieving a clipboard. Stand up, she instructed Amara. When Amara complied, Miller began an invasive pat-down that went well beyond standard procedure, her fingers lingering deliberately to maximize discomfort. Remove your jewelry, Miller ordered next. Amara unclasped her pearl necklace and removed her earrings, placing them in a plastic property bag. My watch was broken during the unlawful arrest, she noted for the record. Officer Whitaker slammed me against the vehicle, causing the watch to fall and shatter. Miller ignored this statement, continuing with mechanical efficiency. Now your hair accessories. Amara frowned. I'm not wearing any hair accessories. Chief Holloway, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward. Your hair needs to be searched. Department policy for all detainees. The implication was clear and deliberately humiliating. My hair does not contain any contraband or weapons, Amara stated firmly. This is harassment and discriminatory treatment based on race. It's standard procedure, Holloway insisted with false reasonableness, for everyone's safety. Officer Miller produced a pair of electric clippers from a drawer. We'll need to do a thorough search. The reality of their intentions hit Amara like a physical blow. They meant to shave her head, her natural hair that she had proudly worn to reclaim her identity under the pretense of security. This wasn't standard procedure. It was calculated humiliation designed to strip her of dignity before she could take the bench. This is a direct violation of my constitutional rights and federal law, Amara stated, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her body. Every person in this room will be held personally liable for this action. Her words fell on deliberately deaf ears as Mercer and another male officer moved to restrain her arms while Miller approached with the clippers. Amara resisted instinctively, knowing that what was about to happen went beyond procedural overreach into deliberate degradation. Stop resisting, Mercer hissed, twisting her arm with unnecessary force. You're just making it worse for yourself, Chief Holloway observed from a calculated distance, maintaining plausible deniability while his officers carried out what he had tacitly authorized. As the officers forced her into a chair, Amara focused on memorizing details, the time on the wall clock, 9:23 a.m., the officers' badge numbers, the specific language they used. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears or pleas. Instead, she channeled her fury into mental documentation of each actionable offense. The clippers buzzed to life with a menacing hum. Let's clean you up, Borty, Miller said with cruel satisfaction, bringing the device to Amara's temple. The first pass of the clippers sent a section of Amara's carefully maintained natural hair falling to the floor. Miller was deliberately careless, leaving uneven patches and small cuts on Amara's scalp as she worked. Oops, she said without remorse when the clippers nicked skin. Should have held still. Throughout the process, the officers made degrading comments. Looking more presentable already, Mercer commented. Probably the first proper haircut she's had, added the other officer with a chuckle. Maybe she'll thank us when she's thinking clearly. Amara remained silent, her eyes fixed on Chief Holloway, who watched the procedure with detached interest. She committed his expression to memory, not just for future testimony, but to fuel the justice she would eventually bring to bear on this department. When Miller finally finished, she stepped back to admire her handiwork. All clear, she announced with mock professionalism. No contraband found. Amara's head was left with uneven patches of hair deliberately shorn in a pattern designed to maximize humiliation rather than perform any legitimate security function. Small beads of blood formed where the clippers had cut her scalp. Get her processed and in holding. Holloway instructed, turning to leave. "We'll verify her identity when we have time." As Amara was fingerprinted and photographed, she maintained rigid composure, denying them the breakdown they sought. The booking photos would show a woman with dignity intact despite the physical humiliation inflicted upon her. After completing the intake process, Miller led Amara to a holding cell already containing 3 other women, all of them Black or Latina. "Special delivery," Miller announced as she locked the cell. "Says she's a federal judge. Maybe she can help with your cases." The officer's laughter echoed down the corridor as she departed. Instead of collapsing once alone, Amara straightened her shoulders and addressed the other detainees. "My name is Federal Judge Amara Washington," she stated calmly. "I was unlawfully detained this morning en route to the courthouse. May I ask why each of you is being held?" The women looked at her with initial skepticism that gradually transformed into cautious trust, as Amara listened to their stories, each one revealing procedural violations and potential civil rights abuses. One woman had been held for 48 hours without charges. Another had been denied her medication. The third had been arrested for trespassing while waiting for a bus on a public bench. As Amara provided legal advice and gathered details about their cases, she was building something beyond her own case against the department. She was mapping a pattern of systemic abuse that would become crucial evidence in the reckoning to come. Have you ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling by police officers? Comment. Number 1. If you believe officers should be held accountable for discriminatory practices, or number 2, if you think these are just isolated incidents. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories exposing injustice in America. What do you think will happen when the police department realizes who they've actually detained? Will Judge Washington's humiliation go unanswered, or is a storm about to break over Oak Ridge County? Let's find out. The administrative phone on the booking desk rang with unusual urgency, its shrill tone cutting through the routine noise of the police station. Officer Clark, who had taken over the front desk during shift change, answered with practiced indifference. His expression transformed from boredom to confusion to alarm in the span of seconds. "Could you repeat that?" he asked, reaching for a pen with suddenly clumsy fingers. "Federal Judge Amara Washington hasn't arrived for her swearing-in ceremony." The courthouse clerk on the other end was insistent, explaining that the judge was now 30 minutes late, her chambers were empty, and the Chief Justice was growing concerned. Clark's eyes darted to the booking log in front of him, where Washington Amara had been entered less than an hour earlier. "Let me transfer you to the chief," Clark stammered, punching the extension for Holloway's office with trembling fingers. 3 minutes after Amara's processing had been completed, the station erupted into frenzied activity. The courthouse had sent over her official judicial portrait and credentials via emergency email, and the image now displayed on every computer screen in the building. Judge Amara Washington, the same woman currently sitting in their holding cell with a mutilated scalp and booking number. Chief Holloway stood frozen in his office, the color draining from his face as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. His confident smirk collapsed into an expression of naked fear as he realized the magnitude of what had just occurred under his authority. 20 years of carefully cultivated power and connections suddenly seemed insufficient protection against the federal storm about to break over his department. "Get her out of holding, now!" He barked into his phone, already calculating damage control strategies that seemed pitifully inadequate. In the booking area, Officer Whitaker was frantically attempting to delete the digital record of Amara's processing, unaware that the system automatically backed up to federal servers beyond his reach. His hands shook as he typed override codes, sweat beading on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. "We're screwed, man," he hissed to Mercer, who stood paralyzed by the realization that they had just committed career suicide. "They can't prove anything if the records disappear. Whitaker insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. What neither officer knew was that Amara's smartwatch, the one they had carelessly tossed into property storage, had activated its emergency protocol when it detected the unusual impact during her arrest. Before the crystal shattered, it had transmitted her location and begun recording audio, sending a continuous feed to her judicial clerk. Every word, every action, every humiliation had been documented and transmitted beyond their reach to federal servers. Down in the holding area, Officer Miller approached the cell with a ring of keys and a dramatically changed demeanor. Judge Washington, she called her previously sneering tone, replaced with transparent terror. "There's been a misunderstanding. You're free to go." Amara rose slowly from the bench, her dignity palpable despite her appearance. "Is that so, Officer Miller?" she replied, her voice steady and deliberate. "Has my identity suddenly become verifiable, or has the courthouse started asking questions?" Miller's eyes darted to the floor, unable to meet Amara's gaze. "The chief would like to speak with you. We've located your credentials and contacted the courthouse. Your vehicle is being brought around, and your personal items are being collected." As Miller unlocked the cell, Amara addressed the other women. "I'll be sending federal marshals to review your cases within the hour," she promised. "The contact information you've provided will ensure you're represented properly." Turning back to Miller, she stepped through the cell door with regal posture. "I will not be speaking with Chief Holloway at this time. Please inform him that our communications will occur in my courtroom or through federal prosecutors at my discretion." Miller paled further. "The chief has authorized me to offer you fresh clothing and transportation to the courthouse. We deeply regret the confusion this morning. I require nothing from this department except the immediate return of my property," Amara replied, "and confusion is a fascinating characterization of deliberate racial profiling and physical assault under color of law." As they walked through the booking area, officers averted their eyes while frantically making calls to union representatives, to lawyers, to family members who might help them flee the jurisdiction. The atmosphere of panic was palpable. Chief Holloway emerged from his office, attempting to intercept Amara before she could leave the building. His face was composed into a mask of professional concern that did nothing to conceal the fear beneath. "Judge Washington," he began, extending a hand that was pointedly ignored, "I cannot adequately express how deeply I regret this unfortunate incident. It appears there was a serious miscommunication among my officers." Amara regarded him with the same unflinching scrutiny she would apply to a defendant in her courtroom. "Chief Holloway, I will be walking to my courtroom exactly as your department has created me," she informed him, her voice carrying throughout the now silent station. "Every officer who participated in my detention and humiliation will be named in federal complaints, both criminal and civil. The record of what happened here begins now." Holloway's professional facade cracked slightly, revealing the desperation beneath. "Judge, surely we can discuss this privately as professionals. There's no need to escalate a simple misunderstanding into a formal complaint." His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, likely calls from the mayor and district attorney, as word spread of the catastrophic error. Amara's response was measured but unyielding. "There was nothing simple about what occurred here today. Chief, your officers profiled me illegally, detained me, assaulted me, and subjected me to degrading treatment because of my race. You personally authorized and observed these actions. The appropriate forum for discussion is now a federal courtroom mine." As Amara collected her personal belongings from the property clerk, her phone, her broken watch, her jewelry, the station continued its descent into chaos. Officers were receiving calls from their superiors, from police union representatives, warning them not to speak without legal counsel, from family members who had already heard rumors of a major incident at the station. Chief Holloway retreated to his office, closing the door to make desperate calls to his political connections. The mayor demanded to know how this could have happened on the very day the federal judge arrived. The district attorney reminded him that federal charges superseded any local protection he might expect. For the first time in 15 years, Richard Holloway's carefully constructed power structure was crumbling beneath him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Amara declined the officer's offer to drive her to the courthouse. "I believe your department has provided enough assistance for one day," she stated, signing for her returned property. With deliberate steps, she walked out of the station into the bright morning sunlight, her head held high despite, or perhaps because of what had been done to her. She knew that every eye in the station was watching her departure, and the message her bearing sent was clear: their actions had failed to diminish her. As she walked the 6 blocks to the federal courthouse, her phone vibrated continuously with messages from her clerk, from the Chief Justice, from concerned colleagues who had heard fragments of what had occurred. She responded only to her clerk: prepare emergency motions based on Title 18 U.S. Code Sections 242 and 245. Contact the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. I will be taking the bench as scheduled. The die was cast. Oak Ridge County's day of reckoning had arrived in a form they never anticipated. A black woman they had tried to humiliate would now sit in judgment over them all. The federal courthouse of Oak Ridge County stood as an architectural embodiment of judicial authority. Limestone columns supporting a neoclassical facade topped by a copper dome that had long ago oxidized to pale green. On any normal day, its imposing presence inspired a certain reverence. Today, as Amara Washington ascended the broad marble steps, that reverence transformed into stunned silence. Courthouse staff, attorneys, and citizens waiting for morning proceedings froze at the sight of her, a black woman in an expensive but rumpled suit, her scalp bearing the unmistakable marks of forcible shearing, walking with unwavering purpose toward the building's main entrance. Security guards who had been briefed to expect the new federal judge stepped forward, their professional composure slipping as they recognized her despite her altered appearance. "Judge Washington," the senior officer confirmed, unable to fully mask his shock. "Yes," Amara replied simply. "Please escort me to my chambers. My staff should be waiting." As they walked through the courthouse corridors, the typical morning bustle fell away into hushed whispers and averted gazes. Those brave enough to maintain eye contact offered looks of horrified sympathy or barely concealed outrage on her behalf. Amara acknowledged none of it, maintaining the same dignified bearing she would have presented had she arrived under normal circumstances. In the antechamber to her judicial offices, her clerk, Marcus Jenkins, and the rest of her staff waited anxiously. Marcus, a brilliant 35-year-old attorney who had worked with Amara for 7 years, stepped forward immediately, professionalism temporarily abandoned in the face of what had clearly been a traumatic morning. "Judge Washington, my God." He breathed, his expression cycling through shock, rage, and determination. "I received the emergency signal from your watch. The audio recording has been secured and backed up to multiple servers. Federal marshals have been notified and are en route to assist." Amara nodded, the first hint of relief crossing her features at the confirmation that evidence had been preserved. "Thank you, Marcus. What's the status of the docket?" Her priority remained the court's function even as her staff struggled to process her appearance. "The Chief Justice delayed the calendar by 1 hour when you didn't arrive," her judicial assistant explained, fighting to maintain professional composure. "Your robes are prepared in your chambers. The first case is—" She hesitated, checking her tablet. "Jenkins v. Oak Ridge Police Department, a civil rights violation claim." The irony was so perfect it might have seemed orchestrated, though it was merely the universe's grim serendipity. A case against the very department that had just violated her rights was scheduled as her first official proceeding. Amara allowed herself a single tight smile. "Appropriate. Please inform the courtroom we'll begin precisely at 10:30. In her private chambers, Amara refused the offers of medical attention, accepting only a first aid kit to address the small cuts on her scalp. "There isn't time," she explained as she cleaned the wounds herself, using her phone's camera as a mirror. Every minute we delay gives them time to destroy evidence and coordinate their stories. Marcus had already filed emergency motions based on the watch recording, moving with the efficiency of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. "Judge, tush," he said hesitantly. "No one would fault you for recusing yourself today for taking time to—" "No," Amara interrupted firmly. "That's exactly what they want for me to hide away in shame, to delay taking my rightful place on this bench. I will not give them that satisfaction." She donned her judicial robe with careful movements, the black fabric settling over her shoulders like armor. The contrast between the robe's solemn authority and her forcibly shorn head created a powerful visual statement that needed no elaboration. At precisely 10:30, the courtroom deputy called the session to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Amara Washington presiding." The packed courtroom rose as one, a collective gasp rippling through the gallery as Amara entered. Her appearance told the story more eloquently than words could have. This was a judge who had been assaulted on her way to the very bench she now claimed. She took her seat with measured dignity, surveying the stunned faces before her. "Court is now in session," she announced, her voice clear and unwavering. "We will proceed with the calendar as scheduled." The first case called was indeed Jenkins v. Oak Ridge Police Department, a civil rights claim filed by a black motorist alleging excessive force and racial profiling during a traffic stop 6 months earlier. The timing could not have been more significant. The department's attorney, a silver-haired local lawyer named Gerald Thompson, approached the bench with visible discomfort, his eyes unable to settle on Amara's altered appearance. "Your Honor, in light of recent events, I would request a continuance of this matter to allow all parties adequate preparation time." Amara regarded him steadily. "On what specific grounds are you requesting this continuance, Counselor?" Thompson shifted his weight, clearly thrown by her direct question. "Well, Your Honor, given the circumstances of your arrival this morning, which we deeply regret, it seems appropriate to postpone until emotions are less immediate." "Mr. Thompson," Amara replied, her voice carrying throughout the silent courtroom, "are you suggesting that I am emotionally compromised and unable to render fair judgment?" The attorney paled. "No, Your Honor, certainly not. I merely—" "Then we will proceed as scheduled," she concluded. "Unless you're filing a formal motion for recusal, which would require specific legal grounds beyond vague concerns about emotions." Thompson retreated to his table, already sensing the shifting ground beneath his case. His next move was predictable. "Your Honor, in that case I must formally move for your recusal from this matter. Given that you have apparently experienced a personal incident involving the Oak Ridge Police Department this morning, there is a clear appearance of bias that would make it impossible for my clients to receive a fair hearing." Amara had anticipated this maneuver and was prepared with her response. "Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed the standards for recusal under Title 28 of the U.S. Code Section 455. The mere fact that I have had contact with the defendant department does not automatically require recusal. The standard is whether my impartiality might reasonably be questioned by an objective observer aware of all facts." She leaned forward slightly. "I assure you I am capable of separating my personal experience from my judicial duties. Your motion is denied." The plaintiff's attorney, a young black woman named Tasha Wilson, could barely contain her professional excitement at this turn of events. "Your Honor, if I may, we're prepared to proceed immediately. In fact, in light of apparent patterns of behavior, we would like to amend our complaint to include additional instances of systemic discrimination." As the hearing proceeded, word spread throughout the legal community about what had transpired. By noon, Amara's chambers had received calls from prominent civil rights attorneys across the state offering their services pro bono. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division had opened a formal investigation based on the watch recording, and national organizations were filing motions to join as interested parties in what was rapidly becoming a landmark case. During the lunch recess, Marcus informed Amara that Chief Holloway and Officer Whitaker had been served with orders to appear before her court the following morning regarding the civil rights case. "They're arguing it creates an unprecedented conflict," Marcus reported. "Their lawyer is filing emergency appeals claiming you can't possibly be impartial." Amara's response was measured. "They'll find no judge willing to overrule me on this, not with the evidence we have." She touched her shorn head lightly. "They wanted to make a statement. Now I'm making mine." As afternoon session began, the courtroom had filled to capacity with journalists and legal observers crowding the gallery. The Oak Ridge legal community was witnessing something unprecedented, a federal judge who had been physically assaulted by local law enforcement now presiding over cases involving those same authorities. Yet Amara conducted proceedings with meticulous adherence to procedure, giving no procedural grounds for appeal based on her conduct. She ruled on motions, heard arguments, and managed her courtroom with the same precision and fairness she would have demonstrated under any circumstances. When the court adjourned at 5 o'clock, Amara had completed a full docket despite the morning's events. As she rose to exit the gallery, spontaneously stood in silent respect attorneys, plaintiffs, defendants, and observers united in recognition of extraordinary judicial courage. In her chambers, Amara finally allowed herself a moment of private reaction, her hands trembling slightly as she removed her robe. Marcus entered after a gentle knock, carrying a sealed envelope. "This just arrived from Judge Hargrove," he said, referring to the senior federal judge who had been in Oak Ridge for 20 years. "He's requesting a private meeting tomorrow morning." Amara opened the note, reading Hargrove's flowery script with growing suspicion. The message expressed profound regret over her unfortunate welcome and suggested they discuss mutual interests in maintaining judicial dignity before hasty actions might damage the community's respect for our institutions. The implication was clear. Judge Hargrove was part of the system that had protected Holloway and his department for decades. Now he was attempting to contain the damage through appeals to institutional loyalty. "Schedule him for 9 a.m., Amara instructed, "and confirm that federal marshals will be providing security for the courthouse beginning tonight." As she gathered her belongings to leave, her judicial assistant appeared with a phone message. The Attorney General himself called. He's assigning a special prosecutor to handle criminal charges against the officers involved. They're treating this as a top priority civil rights case. Amara nodded, unsurprised by the rapid federal response. An attack on a federal judge was an attack on the judiciary itself, one of the few actions that could unite the often divided branches of government in common cause. What had happened to her was no longer just her personal trauma. It had become a constitutional crisis that demanded institutional response. "One more thing," her assistant added hesitantly. "There are reporters outside, dozens of them. They're requesting a statement." Amara considered this for a moment before shaking her head. "No statements outside official court proceedings. Justice speaks through rulings, not press conferences." As she prepared to leave through a secure exit, escorted by temporary security until the marshals arrived, Amara caught her reflection in her office window. The woman who looked back at her was transformed from the one who had arrived in Oak Ridge just 24 hours earlier. Her forcibly shorn head now stood as visible evidence of the very injustice she had been appointed to address. They had meant to diminish her, but instead had only made her purpose more visible, her authority more meaningful. Tomorrow, Chief Holloway would stand in her courtroom, and the true balance of power in Oak Ridge County would begin to shift. Night fell over Oak Ridge County as emergency meetings convened behind closed doors. In the wood-paneled conference room of the police union headquarters, Chief Holloway paced like a caged predator, while union lawyers outlined their limited options. "The recording from her watch is damning," the head attorney explained, his expression grim. "We need to get ahead of this narrative before it completely destroys the department." Holloway slammed his fist on the polished table. "What we need is to discredit her, make this about an outsider coming in with an agenda against law enforcement." Across town, in the elegant study of his historic home, Judge William Hargrove sipped bourbon as he made calls to his considerable network of local power brokers, old money families, business leaders, politicians who owed their positions to his support. This situation requires delicate handling. He counseled each one. Judge Washington is clearly unfit for our community, but we must be strategic in how we approach this unfortunate incident. Meanwhile, at the local ABC affiliate, Woke News Director Thomas Bridges reviewed footage his team had assembled under Chief Holloway's guidance, carefully edited booking photos showing Amara with an expression that could be interpreted as confrontational statements from selected officers, describing her as belligerent and uncooperative. The narrative being constructed portrayed Amara as the aggressor, a radical outsider attempting to use her position to attack local law enforcement. We'll run with controversy surrounds new federal judge for the 10 o'clock broadcast. Bridges decided knowing the financial benefits of aligning with Oak Ridge's established power structure. Keep it balanced, raise questions about her temperament and background. The hastily assembled resistance moved with practice coordination, having successfully buried similar incidents for decades. Judge Hargrove made a midnight call to a contact at the Judicial Review Board, laying groundwork for a complaint about Amara's emotional involvement, compromising the judiciary's impartiality. The police union activated its social media network, flooding local community groups with posts questioning why a federal judge would be driving alone without security if she were legitimate. Local business owners who depended on police goodwill began canceling advertising with the one newspaper that had presented a more objective account of the incident. By dawn, the counteroffensive was in full swing. The morning broadcast led with "Questions Arise About New Federal Judge's Conduct," featuring an interview with a police procedure expert who suggested standard protocols had been followed, given the suspicious circumstances. What none of them anticipated was that Amara's watch had continued recording long after the battery should have died, capturing not just her detention and humiliation, but the subsequent panicked conversations among officers as they realized their mistake. At 2:17 a.m., this unedited audio file was anonymously uploaded to multiple national news platforms, accompanied by time-stamped surveillance footage from businesses along the route where Amara had been stopped. The unvarnished truth of what had occurred spread across social media with unstoppable momentum, drowning out the local damage control efforts. As morning broke, Amara awoke in her hotel room, now guarded by federal marshals. Overnight, her story had transformed from a local incident into a national civil rights flashpoint. Her phone contained hundreds of messages from colleagues, civil rights leaders, and ordinary citizens expressing outrage and support. Outside her window, she could see a gathering crowd of local black women, many with shaved or partially shaved heads, in solidarity, holding signs reading, "Her Honor, Her Crown," and "Justice doesn't need hair to be blind." The hotel manager nervously informed her that death threats had been called in overnight, necessitating additional security protocols. "We've had to remove some staff who were photographing your room door," he admitted, unable to meet her eyes. Amara received this information with the same composed dignity she had maintained throughout. "Thank you for your diligence," she replied, neither expressing fear nor minimizing the danger. As she prepared for her second day on the bench, selecting a silk scarf to wrap around her injured scalp, Marcus arrived with updates on the rapidly evolving situation. "The resistance is organized but fracturing," he reported. "Overnight leaks from inside the department suggest Officer Miller is considering turning state's evidence. She's apparently saved text messages from Holloway directing officers to find reasons to detain you before you could establish yourself in the courthouse." This confirmation of premeditation transformed the legal landscape. What might have been dismissed as overzealous officers was now revealed as a coordinated conspiracy against a federal judge, a much more serious offense with far-reaching implications. Judge Hargrove's scheduled meeting in 20 minutes is almost certainly an attempt to pressure you into recusal or transfer, Marcus continued. His connections to Holloway go back decades. Financial records show Hargrove's Family Foundation has been funding the police department's community outreach programs, which appear to be covers for surveillance operations in predominantly black neighborhoods. Amara absorbed this information with clinical detachment. Have the U.S. Marshals escort Judge Hargrove directly to my chambers when he arrives. No stops to speak with anyone else in the building. When Hargrove arrived, his customary judicial confidence faltered at the sight of federal marshals flanking Amara's office. The elderly judge had expected a private conversation between colleagues. Instead, he found himself in what was effectively a secured federal space with witnesses to every word. Judge Washington, he began with forced joviality. I wanted to personally express my regret over yesterday's unfortunate misunderstanding. Amara observed him with the penetrating gaze that had unnerved countless witnesses in her previous courtrooms. Is that what you call a coordinated attack on a federal judge, Judge Hargrove, a misunderstanding? Hargrove's smile tightened. Now let's not be dramatic. Officers made errors in judgment certainly, but I'm concerned that rushing to formalize complaints might damage the community's respect for our institutions. The community's respect for our institutions was damaged when those sworn to uphold the law conspired to violate it, Amara replied evenly. But I'm curious, how did you learn the details of what occurred Chief Holloway's call to you last night, perhaps? The color drained from Hargrove's face. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Amara interrupted. I'm directly stating that phone records will show communication between you and Chief Holloway both before my arrival in Oak Ridge and immediately following my detention. The question is whether those communications included advance knowledge of plans to intimidate or harm a federal judge. Hargrove's indignation collapsed into barely concealed panic. You have no authority to investigate a fellow federal judge. Any complaint against me would require review by the Judicial Council. You're absolutely right, Amara agreed with deceptive mildness, which is why I've already filed a formal complaint detailing your apparent involvement in obstruction of justice and conspiracy against rights. The investigating authorities will determine the appropriate course of action. As Hargrove left her chambers visibly shaken, Amara turned her attention to the day's docket. The Jenkins case against the police department was scheduled to continue with Chief Holloway and Officer Whitaker ordered to appear as witnesses. Outside the courthouse, the morning's resistance efforts were being met with a growing counter-presence. The local black community, joined by civil rights activists from neighboring counties, had organized an impromptu demonstration of support. Social media had transformed #HerHonorHerCrown into a national trending topic, with black women across the country posting photos of shaved heads in solidarity. Local news crews who had run with Holloway's narrative found themselves confronted by national media asking pointed questions about their editorial decisions. The resistance that had seemed so formidable at midnight was crumbling by mid-morning. As Chief Holloway arrived at the courthouse for his mandated appearance, he was greeted by a gauntlet of cameras and demonstrators. The man who had ruled Oak Ridge's law enforcement with unchallenged authority for 15 years now moved with the furtive demeanor of someone who recognized his vulnerability. The resistance had miscalculated fatally. They had targeted Amara Washington, assuming she would break under humiliation or flee back to Washington, D.C. Instead, they had given her the most powerful platform possible from which to expose decades of systemic abuse. Their attempts to discredit her had only amplified her voice and authenticated her purpose. As the courthouse bells chimed 10 a.m., signaling the start of the day's session, the question hanging over Oak Ridge County was no longer whether justice would prevail, but how many of the old guard would fall in its pursuit. Do you believe Judge Washington's response shows extraordinary courage or recklessness in the face of established power? Comment number 1. If you admire her unwavering commitment to justice despite personal attacks, or number 2, if you think she should have recused herself for her own safety. Hit that like button if you're inspired by her refusal to be intimidated, and subscribe to our channel for more stories about individuals standing up against systemic racism. What hidden evidence might Officer Miller reveal about the department's targeting of Judge Washington? Will Judge Hargrove's connection to this conspiracy be fully exposed? Stay with us as we continue this extraordinary story of justice resistance and the power of dignity in the face of humiliation. The federal courtroom hummed with tension as Officer James Whitaker took the witness stand, his uniform pressed to perfection, but his composure visibly frayed. Every seat in the gallery was filled local citizens, national media, legal observers, all leaning forward in anticipation. Chief Holloway sat prominently in the front row, his imposing presence a silent message to his officer, "Say nothing damaging." Amara Washington presided from the bench, her judicial robe a stark contrast to her wrapped head, the physical evidence of Whitaker's actions visible for all to see. "Officer Whitaker," began Tasha Wilson, the plaintiff's attorney, "please describe your department's protocol for traffic stops involving professional credentials." Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. "We're trained to verify all identification regardless of claims about professional status." "And how do you typically verify a claim that someone is a judge or lawyer?" Wilson continued, laying groundwork with practiced precision. "We would call dispatch to confirm or contact the courthouse directly," Whitaker admitted reluctantly. "Why wasn't this protocol followed yesterday morning when Judge Washington identified herself to you?" The question hung in the air, its implications unmistakable. Whitaker glanced toward Chief Holloway before answering. "I didn't believe her claim was credible. Despite her providing a driver's license matching the name of the federal judge scheduled to begin that very morning," Wilson pressed. "I determined additional verification was necessary," Whitaker replied stiffly. "Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning," interrupted Gerald Thompson, the police department's attorney. "The events of yesterday morning are not relevant to the Jenkins case before us today." Amara regarded him with measured consideration. "Counselor, the plaintiff has alleged a pattern of discriminatory traffic stops targeting black citizens. Evidence of such a pattern occurring as recently as yesterday is plainly relevant. Objection overruled." As Wilson continued her methodical dismantling of Whitaker's testimony revealing contradictions between his account and documented evidence, Marcus slipped into the courtroom and discreetly placed a note before Amara. It read, "Officer Miller requesting meeting with federal prosecutors. Claims documentary evidence of departmental targeting. Justice Department representatives arrived 10 minutes ago." This development confirmed what Amara had suspected: the department's unity was fracturing under pressure, with self-preservation now trumping loyalty. During a brief recess, Amara reviewed emergency motions filed overnight. National civil rights organizations were petitioning to join the case as interested parties. The Justice Department had moved to supersede local authorities in investigating the attack on a federal judge. Most significantly, 3 additional plaintiffs had come forward with nearly identical experiences of discriminatory treatment by the Oak Ridge Police Department, strengthening the pattern evidence. When court resumed, Chief Holloway had been called to testify about departmental policies. His testimony, smooth practice designed to create plausible deniability, portrayed a department committed to professionalism and equality. This carefully constructed narrative began to unravel when Wilson introduced evidence discovered through emergency discovery internal departmental communications, revealing targeted surveillance of black professionals new to Oak Ridge, designated as Community Integrity Monitoring. "Chief Holloway," Wilson asked, "can you explain why Judge Washington's hotel and vehicle were placed under surveillance prior to any alleged traffic violation?" Holloway's composure slipped momentarily. "Standard security protocols for visiting dignitaries," he claimed, "for their protection." "Then perhaps you can explain this email sent from your account to Officer Whitaker the night before Judge Washington's detention," Wilson displayed a document on the courtroom screen. Make sure our new visitor understands Oak Ridge protocols before she gets comfortable in our courthouse. First impressions matter. The implication was unmistakable. During another recess, Chief Holloway approached Marcus in the hallway outside chambers, his attempt at intimidation transparent. "Your judge is making powerful enemies," he warned, unaware that courthouse security cameras were recording the interaction. "This community has ways of protecting its own. She might want to consider whether staying in Oak Ridge is worth the personal risk." Marcus reported this encounter immediately to the federal marshals, adding another charge to the growing list against Holloway, attempted witness intimidation. By afternoon, news broke that Officer Sandra Miller had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for consideration in her own case. As the officer directly responsible for shaving Amara's head, Miller faced significant personal liability. Her testimony would reportedly include text messages, departmental memos, and recorded conversations, demonstrating that Amara had been specifically targeted for harassment before she could establish authority in the courthouse. The most damning evidence emerged when federal technicians recovered deleted files from the department's servers, a research dossier on Judge Amara Washington compiled weeks before her arrival, including her home address, daily routines, and personal history. A notation in Chief Holloway's handwriting read, "Potential threat to departmental autonomy requires preemptive measures." This evidence transformed the narrative from individual officer misconduct to conspiracy against a federal judge, a crime carrying severe penalties. As pressure mounted, cracks in the department's unity widened. Junior officers began approaching federal investigators seeking immunity deals in exchange for testimony. The local prosecutor's office, sensing the shifting winds, announced it would cooperate fully with federal authorities. Even Judge Hargrove, scrambling to distance himself from the conspiracy, issued a public statement praising Amara's remarkable judicial temperament under extraordinary circumstances. The counterattack gained momentum beyond the courtroom. Community organizations announced a boycott of businesses that had supported the police department's narrative. Local clergy organized prayer vigils supporting justice and accountability. Most powerfully, black women throughout Oak Ridge began appearing in public with shaved or partially shaved heads. Teachers, nurses, business owners, students, creating a visual testament to solidarity that could not be ignored. Behind the scenes, however, the established power structure fought to maintain control. Judge Hargrove filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Council, arguing that Amara's emotional involvement has compromised the judiciary's impartiality. This triggered an automatic review that could potentially remove her from both her personal case and the broader civil rights litigation. The police union activated political connections, pressuring state officials to intervene in what they characterized as federal overreach into local law enforcement matters. These efforts to undermine Amara's authority faced an unexpected obstacle: the watch recording. As more complete versions circulated, the unedited audio captured not just her detention and humiliation, but damning conversations among officers revealing racial animus and explicit acknowledgement that they were targeting her because of her race and position. Public opinion, initially divided along predictable lines, shifted decisively as this unfiltered evidence reached more listeners. By evening, national civil rights leaders had arrived in Oak Ridge, transforming a local incident into a focal point for broader conversations about judicial independence and police accountability. News crews from major networks set up outside the courthouse, broadcasting updates to a national audience now invested in Amara Washington's stand against entrenched discrimination. Amara herself maintained judicial detachment from the growing movement around her case. She continued presiding over her docket with meticulous adherence to procedure, neither accelerating nor delaying the cases involving the department that had assaulted her. Her judicial rulings provided no procedural grounds for appeal, forcing all parties to address the substantive issues of constitutional violations and systemic discrimination. As darkness fell over Oak Ridge, The courthouse stood illuminated against the night sky, federal marshals visibly posted at every entrance. Inside her chambers, Amara reviewed case files for the following day, her rapt head bent over legal documents as she prepared to continue administering justice, not despite what had been done to her, but because of it. The counterattack had not merely survived the resistance. It had transformed it into the very evidence needed to achieve lasting change. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the historic federal courthouse as the Judicial Review Board convened in the ceremonial courtroom. 5 distinguished judges from neighboring districts had assembled to determine whether Judge Amara Washington should continue presiding over cases involving the Oak Ridge Police Department, including litigation related to her own treatment. The gravity of the proceedings was reflected in the formal arrangement of the room, the review panel seated at the curved mahogany bench, attorneys for all interested parties at tables before them, and the gallery filled to capacity with legal observers and media representatives. Amara herself sat at a small table facing the panel, representing her own interests rather than delegating to counsel a choice that conveyed both confidence and respect for the institutional process. At precisely 9 a.m., Chief Judge Eleanor Martinez called the hearing to order. These proceedings will address the complaint filed by Judge William Hargrove alleging that Judge Amara Washington's personal experience with the Oak Ridge Police Department creates an appearance of bias that necessitates her recusal from related cases. Judge Martinez's tone made clear that despite the extraordinary circumstances, this would be a proceeding governed by legal standards, not emotion or politics. Judge Washington, you may begin your response to the complaint. Amara rose with measured dignity, her rapt head a visual reminder of the attack that had prompted this review. Her voice when she spoke carried the balanced resonance of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms, neither elevated in passion nor diminished by intimidation. "Honored colleagues, so," she began, "I appear before you today in dual consciousness as a federal judge sworn to uphold our Constitution and as a black woman who has experienced the very constitutional violations alleged in cases before my court. This duality is not a conflict requiring recusal. It is precisely the perspective our judiciary requires to fulfill its mandate of equal justice under law." For the next 40 minutes, Amara presented a masterful legal argument grounded in judicial precedent, constitutional principles, and ethical standards. She distinguished between personal bias and informed perspective, cited cases where judges with personal knowledge of systemic issues had properly remained on related cases, and articulated why her removal would set a dangerous precedent that could be exploited to target other judges. "I was not detained as a judge who happens to be black," she stated in the most quoted portion of her testimony. "I was detained as a black woman who happened to be a judge, and the distinction matters profoundly to justice in this country. If experiencing the very constitutional violations alleged in my courtroom disqualifies me from hearing such cases, then we create a perverse incentive for those who wish to avoid judicial scrutiny." Following Amara's presentation, the board heard from national legal experts who had submitted amicus briefs supporting her continued oversight of the cases. Professor Jonathan Reed of Harvard Law School testified that Judge Washington's handling of proceedings since the incident has demonstrated exemplary judicial temperament and procedural fairness, providing no legitimate grounds for recusal. Former Supreme Court Clerk Sarah Michaels presented an analysis of judicial ethics standards, concluding that forced recusal under these circumstances would undermine judicial independence and create a troubling precedent whereby judges could be removed through deliberate provocation. The afternoon session brought the most anticipated testimony, Officer Sandra Miller, who had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors. Miller entered the courtroom in civilian clothes, rather than her uniform, visibly nervous but determined. Under oath, she revealed the existence of a departmental initiative called Community Integrity Maintenance that specifically targeted black professionals moving to Oak Ridge. Chief Holloway told us that maintaining community standards meant making sure certain people understood they weren't welcome, Miller testified. When Judge Washington's appointment was announced, he called a special briefing. He told us she needed to be put in her place before she could establish authority in the courthouse. Miller's testimony included text messages and departmental memos supporting her account. Most damning was an audio recording from a staff meeting where Holloway could be heard saying, "We need to send a message to D.C. that they can't just parachute their diversity hires into our jurisdiction and expect us to surrender control." This evidence transformed the review from an examination of Amara's potential bias to an investigation of a criminal conspiracy against a federal judge. Miller's testimony about the shearing incident itself was particularly powerful. It wasn't standard procedure, she admitted, visibly uncomfortable with her own actions in retrospect. "We don't shave detainees' heads for security searches. That was specifically done to humiliate her. I was told it would take her down a peg before she took the bench." As Miller described the deliberate cruelty of leaving uneven patches and causing small cuts, several board members visibly recoiled. Judge Martinez interrupted to ask, "At what point did you learn she was actually the federal judge she claimed to be?" Miller's response was devastating. Chief Holloway knew before the processing began. "I heard him on the phone with Judge Hargrove discussing how to handle the situation. They decided to complete the processing, including the head shaving, before discovering her identity. The chief said it would teach her to know her place." This revelation that Holloway had knowingly authorized the degradation of a federal judge after confirming her identity elevated the misconduct from serious to potentially criminal. The testimony continued with evidence that Judge Hargrove had been involved in discussions about how to pressure Amara into requesting a transfer after the incident. Phone records confirmed calls between Hargrove and Holloway immediately before and after Amara's detention. Emails retrieved from Hargrove's court account included messages to colleagues in other districts asking about potential openings that might provide a graceful exit for our unfortunate situation in Oak Ridge. By late afternoon, the review board had heard from all scheduled witnesses. Judge Martinez announced they would deliberate and deliver their decision the following morning. As the courtroom emptied, journalists rushed to file stories about Miller's explosive testimony and the evidence of coordination between the police department and a sitting federal judge. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown throughout the day as word of the testimony spread. Black women with shaved heads stood in silent rows on the courthouse steps, creating a powerful visual statement for the evening news broadcasts. Community activists organized a candlelight vigil that drew thousands, transforming the legal proceedings into a broader movement for accountability and change. In her hotel room that evening, Amara reviewed the day's testimony, with Marcus identifying legal implications and potential next steps regardless of the board's decision. "They'll rule in your favor," Marcus predicted confidently. Miller's testimony about Hargrove's involvement changes everything. This isn't about your recusal anymore. It's about judicial corruption. Amara's response was measured. "The legal standard is clear. The question is whether the board will have the courage to apply it in the face of institutional pressure." The following morning, as predicted, the board ruled unanimously in Amara's favor. Judge Martinez delivered the decision, having reviewed all evidence and testimony. This panel finds no basis for mandatory recusal. Judge Washington has demonstrated exemplary judicial temperament under extraordinary circumstances. Her continued oversight of related cases is not merely permissible, but necessary for the appearance and substance of justice to be served. The ruling continued with an unprecedented addendum. This panel is referring evidence concerning Judge William Hargrove's communications with law enforcement to the Judicial Council for further investigation. The integrity of our courts requires that such allegations be thoroughly examined, regardless of the judge's seniority or connections. As news of the decision spread, Oak Ridge experienced its most profound shift in decades. The mayor, recognizing the changing political winds, announced an independent investigation of the police department. Officer Whitaker was suspended pending termination proceedings. Most significantly, though Chief Holloway initially resisted pressure to step down by afternoon, his position had become untenable. The county commissioners, concerned about municipal liability, publicly requested his resignation. Federal prosecutors announced plans to present evidence to a grand jury regarding conspiracy charges against department leadership. The city that had awakened just 8 days earlier as a bastion of entrenched power now faced a fundamental restructuring of its institutions. That evening, thousands gathered outside the courthouse in the largest civil rights demonstration in the county's history. Speakers, including national civil rights leaders, addressed the crowd, placing Amara's experience within the broader context of judicial reform and police accountability. While Amara herself did not attend maintaining appropriate judicial distance from political activism, the movement that had formed around her case had developed its own momentum. The testimony had done more than vindicate Amara's right to remain on the bench. It had exposed decades of systemic discrimination and judicial complicity that could no longer be ignored or denied. The public narrative had irrevocably shifted from questioning her fitness to serve to demanding accountability from those who had attempted to prevent her service through intimidation and abuse of power. The day's events underscored a truth at the heart of Amara's stance justice required, not merely her presence on the bench, but her refusal to be removed from it by those who feared her authority. Her testimony had transformed a personal humiliation into a powerful catalyst for institutional change. 6 months passed, like the turning of seasons each day, bringing small but meaningful changes to Oak Ridge County. The federal courthouse, once an imposing symbol of established power, had transformed into a beacon of constitutional protection under Judge Amara Washington's steady guidance. Her natural hair had begun to regrow, which she wore proudly without apology or concealment. The patches and uneven sections that remained served as visible reminders of injustice confronted and overcome not with violence or vengeance, but through the patient, unyielding application of law. On this particular morning, Amara reviewed the final terms of the consent decree that would reshape the Oak Ridge Police Department for generations to come. After months of litigation, testimony, and negotiation, the department had agreed to comprehensive reforms, mandatory bias training conducted by civil rights experts, community oversight boards with actual authority, body cameras with automatic activation, transparent disciplinary procedures, and termination protocols for officers violating constitutional rights. Most significantly, the decree established federal monitoring for 5 years to ensure compliance wasn't merely performative. The document before her represented more than legal victory. It embodied the practical, tangible change that could emerge from individual courage multiplied by institutional authority. As Amara signed the order, her thoughts drifted to the cascade of transformations that had followed her refusal to be diminished. Chief Holloway had finally resigned 3 months earlier when additional evidence surfaced connecting him to systematic civil rights violations extending beyond her case. His replacement, Chief Darius Jackson, was a 20-year veteran of the state police with a reputation for ethical leadership and community engagement. Officer Whitaker faced both criminal charges and civil penalties. His career in law enforcement permanently ended. Several other officers directly involved in her detention and humiliation had been terminated, while those who cooperated with investigators received varying consequences based on their actions and subsequent accountability. Judge William Hargrove, whose backroom dealings with Holloway had been exposed through phone records and emails, had taken early retirement rather than face a judicial conduct investigation that would have likely ended in removal. His departure created an opening that had been filled by Judge Michaela Rodriguez, a respected state court judge whose appointment diversified the federal bench in Oak Ridge for the second time in a year. Beyond these individual consequences, broader structural changes had taken root. Amara had established a legal clinic helping citizens document and challenge rights violations, staffed partly by law students from historically black universities who gained valuable experience while providing essential services to the community. Local grassroots organizations that had mobilized around her case had developed into effective advocacy groups addressing housing discrimination, educational inequality, and voter suppression throughout the county. Most meaningfully, Amara had become a mentor to young black women pursuing legal careers. Once a month, she hosted discussions in her chambers for law students and early career attorneys, sharing not just legal strategies, but the personal resilience required to transform obstacles into opportunities for systemic change. Today's mentoring session would focus on the intersection of personal identity and professional responsibility, a topic on which she could now speak with unique authority. Later that afternoon, Amara delivered the keynote address at the National Judicial Conference, where she unveiled new recommended protocols for police interactions with judiciary members. These protocols significantly protected everyone's rights, not just judges. The test of justice is not how we protect the powerful, she told the assembled judges, but how we ensure that protections extend equally to those without titles or authority. Her experience had crystallized into a judicial philosophy that recognized how personal perspective could strengthen rather than compromise impartial judgment. "We don't abandon our lived experiences when we don the robe," she explained. "We integrate them into a more complete understanding of how constitutional principles must function in real lives." As her presentation concluded, Amara addressed the question that had followed her since that morning in the police station: forgiveness. "I'm often asked if I forgive those who humiliated me," she said, her voice carrying through the silent auditorium. "Forgiveness without accountability isn't justice, it's permission. I didn't seek vengeance. I sought change, and change, unlike hair, doesn't grow back the same way twice." The standing ovation that followed acknowledged not just her eloquence, but the extraordinary dignity with which she had transformed personal humiliation into institutional improvement. Returning to her chambers that evening, Amara encountered a young black law student waiting in the anteroom. The student wore her natural hair in a style similar to Amara's before the incident, and carried a well-worn copy of Amara's recent law review article on judicial independence. "Judge Washington," the student began nervously, "I've been following your work since what happened. I changed my focus to civil rights law because of you." Amara invited the student into her office, recognizing in her the same determination she had once felt as a young lawyer. Their conversation covered legal theory, practical strategies, and the young woman's ambitions to eventually become a judge herself. As the student departed, she passed Officer Miller in the hallway, the former police officer now working as a police reform advocate after serving community service and probation for her role in Amara's humiliation. Miller's testimony had been crucial in establishing the pattern of misconduct, and her subsequent work with reform initiatives represented its own kind of redemption. The brief, awkward nod between the former officer and the law student symbolized how one moment of injustice properly confronted had created ripples of transformation throughout the system. In her final task of the day, Amara reviewed applications for the Civil Rights Legal Fellowship her court had established. Among the applicants were promising young attorneys from across the country, drawn to Oak Ridge not despite its troubled history, but because of the opportunity to participate in its transformation. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate and disempower had instead created a center of excellence for civil rights advocacy. Amara touched her hair, now growing in with natural dignity, and thought about the officers who had believed they could diminish her authority by attacking her appearance. They had failed to understand that justice derives its power not from symbols or appearances, but from the unwavering commitment to constitutional principles, even or especially when those principles must be applied to protect the rights of those who show contempt for them. The transformation of Oak Ridge County was neither complete nor irreversible. Progress would require ongoing vigilance, and resistance to change would emerge in new, subtler forms. But something fundamental had shifted. Those who had wielded power without accountability now understood that their actions had consequences, while those who had suffered silently now recognized their capacity to demand justice. And at the center of this transformation stood a federal judge who had transformed humiliation into authority, not by seeking revenge, but by insisting that the law apply equally to everyone, including those who had tried to place themselves above it. What do you think about Judge Washington's approach to transforming injustice into meaningful change? Would you have handled this situation differently if you were in her position? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can translate individual courage into systemic reform. If this story of resilience and justice inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who need to hear that dignity can prevail even in the face of humiliation. Thank you for joining us for this powerful journey from injustice to transformation. May it remind us all that true change begins when we refuse to accept the limitations others try to impose upon us. Judge Amara Washington's journey reveals powerful truths about confronting injustice. First, dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. By refusing to hide her forced haircut, she transformed her humiliation into a symbol of resilience that inspired an entire community. Second, true change requires both individual courage and institutional authority. Amara's legal expertise allowed her to channel personal trauma into systemic reform, demonstrating that the most effective advocates understand both the lived experience of discrimination and the mechanisms to address it. Third, justice isn't about revenge, but accountability. Rather than seeking to punish her abusers, Amara focused on creating lasting reforms that would protect everyone's rights. Fourth, solidarity multiplies impact. When Black women across Oak Ridge shaved their heads in support, they created a visual movement that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Finally, transformation begins with refusing to accept the limitations others impose. By maintaining her judicial authority despite efforts to diminish it, Amara established that true power comes not from intimidation, but from unwavering commitment to constitutional principles applied equally to everyone, especially those who show contempt for those principles. Have you ever witnessed someone transform humiliation into power like Judge Washington did? What would you have done in her position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of individuals standing up against systemic racism and injustice. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need inspiration to stand their ground in the face of discrimination. Thank you for joining us for this journey from injustice to transformation. Remember, dignity is your birthright that no one can take without your permission. May we all find the courage to hold those in power accountable while maintaining our own humanity in the process.